hear me? Uh-oh. Is this working? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So now after that hullabaloo, let's get quiet and please join me in a moment of centering silence so we can come back and be here together. Thank you. And now, please remain seated as we sing our ingathering hymn, which is number 155 and appears in your order of service, and we will sing it through 2 times. Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. This is a community where curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nurturing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual, as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Karen Rose Gredler, and on behalf of the congregation, I would like to extend a special welcome to visitors who are with us this morning. We are a welcoming congregation, so whomever you are and wherever you happen to be on your life journey, we celebrate your presence among us. Newcomers are encouraged to stay for our fellowship hour after the service and to visit the library, which is directly across from the center doors of this auditorium. Bring your beverages and your questions. Members of our staff and lay ministry will be on hand to welcome you. You may also look for persons holding teal-colored stoneware coffee mugs. These are FUS members knowledgeable about our faith community who would welcome visiting with you. Experienced guides are often available to give building tours after each service. So if you would like to learn more about this sustainably designed addition or our National Landmark Meeting House, please meet near the large glass window on your left side of the auditorium. I did not see a guide listed this morning, so if you want a tour, go stand there, and hopefully if you are a guide, you can go over to them and guide them, please. We welcome children to stay for the duration of the service. However, because it is difficult for some in attendance to hear in this lively acoustical environment, our child haven back in that corner and the commons area behind the auditorium are excellent places to go if a child needs to talk or move around or have more fun than they're having in here. The service can still be seen and heard from those areas. Also, this would be an excellent time to turn off any devices that might cause a disturbance during the hour, especially cell phone ringers. So please take care of that. I'd now like to acknowledge those individuals who did sign up to help our services run smoothly. Our sound operator is David Briles. Our lay minister is Tom Boykoff. Liz Wessel hopped in to help by being a greeter because we had no one signed up there. Hint, hint. Our ushers are Liza Monroe and Dick Goldberg, and I think Doug Hill is helping as well because there were only 2 people signed up to be ushers. Our hospitality folks making coffee for us are Greg and Colleen Phelps and Nancy Kossoff. Please notice the announcements in the red floors insert in your order of service, which describe upcoming events at the Society and provide more information about what's going on today and this week. Lots of good information in there. Again, welcome. We hope today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit. Thank you.
Sojourner Truth said, to the preachers, and I can imagine her saying it like that, to the preachers. When God comes down, you seem to be expecting to go to some parlor up away somewhere. And when the wicked have been burnt, you're going to come back down in triumph and walk over their ashes like this is your new Jerusalem? Nah, I can't see anything so very nice in that. Coming back? Such a mess that will be. The world covered with the ashes of the wicked. And if the Lord comes as you say he's going to come, I'm not going away. I want to stand here and I want to meet him. Besides, nothing belonging to God can burn any more than God himself can. Such shall I have no need to go away, no need to escape. No, I will remain. Do you tell me that God's children can't stand in the fire? I think it is absurd to think so. And folks, if you want to rise as we light and kindle our own fire here and join me in the words of the lighting of the chalice that are in your order of service where Karen Rose lights them. Flame of life and light, blaze again in our hearts and minds as we join together in this space made sacred by our aspirations. Let us celebrate the gift that is our life and seek the great love that makes all beings whole. And in the interest of making this community whole, I encourage you to exchange friendly greetings with your neighbors. Any children who want to wade their way up to the front for a story? We've got a lovely one. Hi. Sit down. It's good to see everybody. Hi. So today's story is about two pretty awesome women who did some pretty awesome things, and their names were Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. Oh, and I don't have to turn this around because there's pictures. Awesome. When America was young and new and wanting to be free, not everyone in America was free. Although it was a land of promise, a land of very great promise, not all promises were kept. And two strong, brave black women wanted America to fulfill its promises and to allow every American born to live free in a land of equal opportunity. This is the story of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was first born sometime in 1797 near the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. She was born the daughter of enslaved parents owned by wealthy Dutch planters, and they gave her the name Isabella. She grew up tall and strong, bending like a willow while working in the fields alongside her 12 brothers and sisters. 12, that's a lot. That's a lot, yeah. She had 12.
Excuse me, how does...
Hey, you guys, why don't we finish the story and then we can ask questions? Does that sound good? All right, cool, thanks. As the crow flies hundreds of miles south from Isabella's birthplace, sometime around 1825, a young slave girl named Armanita was born. Armanita dreamed of freedom, of flying away with her whole family. She did not know how or when, but she yearned for flight, and one day in freedom, she would be known as Harriet Tubman. Isabella this and Isabella that, forced to obey a parade of masters from dawn to dusk, sent from farm to farm, away from her brothers and sisters, and away from her parents, poor Isabella. She vowed when she grew up, she would leave slavery behind and be poor Isabella no more. She would defeat those who had tried to defeat her and rename herself Sojourner Truth. Armanita hungered for freedom as well. She lived in fear of the auction block. She thought she might be put up for sale and sold away from her brothers and sisters. So like a quilt she worked on, one square at a time, she pieced together her plans for running off to the north. It took patience and skill. It took listening and learning. She needed reliable advice about an escape route. But she had faith, great faith, that she was made for bigger things. And she knew she would find those things once she was allowed to be free. Isabella's master promised that he would set her free, and she waited patiently 12 long months before asking her master to emancipate her. When she finally confronted him, her owner broke his promise and said she must stay a slave just a little longer. But Isabella was tired of waiting, and she broke her chains herself. She walked away and left slavery behind. And then her master illegally sold her son away, so she went to court to win him back. Isabella became a tower of strength for her friends and family, and she gave herself the new name Sojourner Truth, and it symbolized that she felt born again into freedom, and she was committed to helping other people find freedom. Sojourner Truth preached and lectured all over the North, from the shores of Massachusetts to Ohio's fruited plains. She made stirring appeals to emancipate both slaves and women in her deep, booming voice that cast a spell over the listeners. Once, a man in the audience told her that women were weak and women needed protection, that women couldn't take care of themselves. I like your reaction. Sojourner Truth got angry, and she stood up 6 feet tall and held out her arm that had been made strong with labor and said, "Oh yeah? Ain't I a woman? Do I look weak?" Harriet Tubman was only 5 feet tall, but she became a giant among her people, working with the Underground Railroad, which is a network of black people and white people who secretly guided runaway slaves to freedom. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? It was not a railroad, nor was it underground, but it was a powerful resistance movement trying to defeat unjust laws. Harriet dodged dogs and bounty hunters, guiding many escaped slaves all the way to Canada. She told her admirers, "I've never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad." Harriet became the most famous Underground Railroad conductor in the years leading up to the Civil War. And when the Civil War began in 1861, both Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman continued their campaigns against slavery. Tall, fiery Sojourner gave speeches across the North, heating up her audiences, convincing men to enlist in the Federal Army and join the battle. She was a staunch defender of the Union cause. Harriet Tubman, cool and collected, worked as a spy behind enemy lines in South Carolina. With iron nerve, projecting a sense of calm before the storm, she led men in uniform on midnight raids, ignoring the danger, as she always had. When Sojourner Truth was speaking on a tour in the fall of 1864, she stopped off in Boston for a visit. It just so happened that Harriet Tubman was in Boston as well, taking time off from her wartime duties in the South. No one took notes or reported the meeting at the time, so we can only imagine what they might have said to one another. After hearing about one another for so many years, they might have warmly embraced, as if finding a long-lost relative. The tall one wore glasses and spoke with a Dutch accent, while the short one still had some of her southern drawl. But they were connected by a kinship deeper than language, perhaps even deeper than blood, the kinship of spirit. When their paths crossed in Boston that October day, there was no photographer and no newspaper interviews. When they parted, Harriet and Sojourner did not know if they would ever see one another again. But sharing stories built a friendship, and the memory of time kept it going, even when they were miles apart. It was the memory of these legendary women carried with them for the rest of their days. Sweet Harriet, Sister Sojourner, together at last. And I hope that you all find friendships that help you do really cool things in the world too. So we're going to sing you out to your classes now. Hope you have a good day. Whenever I go to church, I'm always jealous that the children get a story and the adults don't. So I was wondering if for the reading today, I could tell you a story that is one of my favorite fiction books. It is Adulthood Rights by Octavia Butler. Has anybody ever read that before? The Xenogenesis series. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot of that book. And for those of you who have read it, I'm not going to use complicated alien terms. Octavia Butler brings us to a world where there are aliens called the Oankali, and these aliens are master gene traders. They have perfected the art of being able to very specifically take traits to breed with. And they go around the universe and find intelligent beings who their species has almost died out, either due to disease or war or what have you. And they take the best of that species and the best of their species, and they breed them together. And at the point in our world where the Oankali encounter the humans, because of course they do, because it's way more fun if it's about us, the humans are on the brink of extinction. The Cold War has turned hot. The Americans and the Russians have almost annihilated the world with nuclear warfare, and the Oankali have decided that the humans as a species have failed. So instead of letting humans continue, they are going to breed something better. But what they do is they take a section of themselves and preserve it because, of course, if the experiment goes wrong, they still want there to be Oankali. But they decide that the humans, they didn't work out, right? So no harm, no foul if the humans aren't around anymore. And funny enough, the humans aren't really keen on this idea. They're really not into it. So they form these resistor camps. And the Oankali aren't really that used to people resisting because their species has been proven to not work. Why wouldn't they want something better? These stubborn humans, what's going on? So they breed a construct, one of these new creatures that is half human and half Oankali, but they breed him to look very, very human and to go into the human resistor camps and get to know the humans and figure out where this strong, persistent survival need is coming from. So his name is Akin. And Akin goes, and he gets to know the humans, and he talks to them, and he grows up with them and is raised by them. And he realizes he has this amazing experience of empathy and realizes what it means to them to become extinct. So he goes back to the aliens when he's a little older, and these aliens have this amazing ability to transmit memories and feelings wholesale, to completely communicate perfectly exactly what they mean. And he does this. He tries to do this, to say we need to allow the humans to try to survive. And I want to read you the passage from Octavia Butler's story where this happens. Even if they won't survive, let them fail on their own. Let me show them to you, not just the way they are in the trade villages, not just their interesting bodies, but here on earth, in their natural habitat, let me show them to you. Then carefully, in the manner of a storyteller, he gave the aliens the experience of his abduction and captivity, of his time with the humans and his conversion. All that he felt, he made them feel. He did what he didn't know he could do. He overwhelmed them. So they, too, at times were both captive and convert. He did it to the abandonment. He did to them what the abandonment of the aliens had done to him in his infancy. He made them understand on an utterly personal level what he had suffered, what the humans suffer, and what he had come to believe. And as soon as the experience had ended, people began objecting to its intensity, objecting to being so overwhelmed, objecting to the idea that this could be the experience of a child so young. And then the people began to converse. Akin could feel them avoiding the subject of preserving the human race. He didn't understand their reactions to it. There was a turning away, a warding off, a denial, a revulsion. It confused him. He was too human to understand their reactions naturally and too alien to disregard them. I believe you. So Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth are both strong, ridiculously inspiring, courageous women. Both of them were born into slavery. Both of them claimed their own freedom, and both of them spent the rest of their lives working towards abolition and suffrage and other promises that were made when we wrote into the fundamental ethics of this country that we wanted all people to be recognized as being created equal. And faith was a huge part of both of these women's journey. Both of them had a deep and personal connection with the divine that allowed them to see humanity in this loving way. And both of them had this courage inspired by God that led them to do the work that they did. Harriet Tubman has often been quoted as saying, "The way I see it, God guaranteed me two things, freedom and death. And if I can't have the first one, I'll take the second one." And I had thought that I would come here today and tell these stories of the journeys of these women and talk about how faith could inspire us to do amazing things in the world. And as I was preparing this service, I realized that if I want to utilize the faith, the courage that my faith gives me, that I can't do that. I can't do that because to only talk about stories of the past is to tokenize these women's courage. And I want to utilize it to propel me to continue their work here today on this earth. Because it's easy, right? It's easy to look back 200 years and say, how could they not have known that slavery was wrong? It's even easy to look back 60 or 70 years and say, how could they not have known that Jim Crow was not okay? But I hope that it doesn't take us 60 or 70 or 200 years to look around and say, how can the term Black Lives Matter be controversial? And that's where some of this courage comes in, right? Because it was really hard for me to just say that. Because I know that there are people in this room right now who do think that it's controversial, or who, at least if they don't think the phrase itself is controversial, think that the movement attached to that phrase is controversial. And that's why I thought that I would get up and tell pretty stories that make us all feel good, and then we could go home. Then something happened. You all started talking to me. I asked you to be brave. I asked you to be honest. And you came forward in the spirit of curiosity and human connection. You responded to my newsletter articles. You talked to me in the loggia and the commons after services. You came to talks where we were talking about the issue of race, even though it is messy and hard. You gave me all kinds of perspectives from which you were coming from. And if I didn't do the same, if I wasn't just as brave and honest with you, not only would it be disrespectful, it would be bad ministry. Because I believe ministry, it has to be a dialogue. Otherwise, I could go join one of those hierarchical faiths and everybody would just have to do what I said. And that's kind of tempting because it sounds easier. But it also sounds like it's a whole lot less prophetic. In spaces like this, when we can talk about the messy, hard things of life, this is where we change the world. So, we've brought in and honored the names of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, and I want to bring in another. I've already talked to you a little bit about Octavia Butler, and that might have seemed like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. Because I really want to honor her in this space as well. Her voice is one that has meant a lot to me. Octavia Butler is a phenomenally successful female Black science fiction writer. And I want to say that again, a phenomenally successful female Black science fiction writer. And the reason that that bears repeating is because it is really, really rare to have a phenomenally successful female science fiction writer. And it is really, really rare to have a phenomenally successful Black science fiction writer. And to have a phenomenally successful female Black science fiction writer means that there must be something going on there worth reading beyond the normal aliens and ray guns, which are wonderful in and of themselves. Octavia Butler does a thing where she allows all human beings to get to the core of both their imagination and their core ethic of right and wrong. And she does it in a way without shaming, because she allows everyone to know what it might feel like to be in a race, in this case, the human race, to be in a race that has no ability to make its own decisions for itself, that has no agency, that has another group of beings have complete power over it. She allows that anger and that helplessness to seep in her writing, And she does it without blaming any specific group of people, because it's the aliens that did it, right? And when I read this novel, and I heard the story of Akin, of that character that I talked to you about in the reading, I was amazingly and instantly covetous of his ability to be able to perfectly communicate and perfectly transmit his stories and his experiences. And I was also a little terrified by it. Because there's something I don't talk a lot about in my Unitarian Universalist circles. There's a part of me and a part of my life and where I come from that's hard for me to talk about, because when I do, folks tend to react a little bit like the aliens reacted in this story. They get overwhelmed, they feel helpless, sometimes they're a little disgusted, and they want some distance from it. But I've come to respect and trust you folks so much that I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable, and I'm going to try to be a little bit brave, and I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about what it was like for me growing up in and around the city of Detroit. I don't have perfect alien empathy transmittal powers, but I'm a decent storyteller. So I'd like to tell you the story of a young boy whose story bears repeating. I once worked in Detroit schools, and my introduction to the school, I worked in Detroit schools as a part of something called communities in schools. Many Detroit schools can't fund language or art programs at all. So the Kellogg Foundation has created a kind of cool program where they find people who have skills in an area, though don't necessarily have a teaching degree or want to teach full-time. And they bring them into the schools to expose students, at least for a couple of hours a day, to music, to arts, to theater, to language. And I had a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater and music, so I was brought in to teach students music and theater for a couple of hours a day. My introduction to the school was being told that I couldn't get into the classroom because it was flooded. The building, Detroit's built on a marshland, and the foundation had started to corrode, and the building had started to sink a little bit, and water was seeping in. So all the teachers that were teaching on the west side of the building had their classes moved to this big gymnasium. It was kind of pandemonium. There were kids everywhere. We didn't have class lists, so we didn't really know whose student was whose, and in fact, we didn't have a consistent enough group of students to keep showing up to figure it out. So we did the best we could. We played theater games, we sang songs in French. And there was this one boy that no matter what we did, he seemed to sort of catch on. He was super bright and super engaged, and I secretly and selfishly hoped that he would be my student if we ever got back into our classrooms. And we did get back into our classrooms. The water subsided, the rain stopped, probably not in that order. And we got back into the classrooms, and I found that I had, in fact, 38 students. 3 of the textbooks in the class had been ruined by the water, which meant that now they had 15 to share amongst them. But I was lucky. That boy was in my class. I got to know him, and he thrived even more in a smaller environment. Anything I put in front of this kid, he could do or at least grapple with. It was amazing. And then one day, I saw him drawing on his desk, so I went over to discipline him. But before I could, I realized the thing that he was drawing was the most sophisticated, amazing thing I'd ever seen a 12-year-old create. It was a sort of demon figure that you might expect from a 12-year-old boy, but it had these gorgeous angel wings. It had these gorgeous angel wings that were completely part of the body, but not in line with the rest of what it was expressing. It had a story and a personality, and I was fascinated by this drawing that a 12-year-old created with a dull pencil on a school desk. I tried to create a relationship with this boy. I got to know him, and I tried to encourage him to keep coming to school. I told him that the College of Creative Studies was only a couple of miles away from his school and that surely he could get a scholarship. He was so talented. And one day he looked at me frankly and he said, "Miss Julie, I'm not going to college. I already started working for my brother." Sometimes in my community, illegal transactions are done by the younger children because if they're caught, they'll be punished less harshly under our legal system. I still had hopes for this boy, and a couple of years later, I went back to the high school that I thought he might have gone to, and at first people wouldn't even mention that they knew the kid. I was an outsider. They wouldn't speak to me or acknowledge that he had ever lived on this planet. Then I saw some of my students that I had taught before. They recognized me and I asked about him. And they said that his family was still around, but that he had disappeared. They hadn't seen him in about a year. And when people say all lives matter, it just gets me right here because his didn't. And he is one of dozens of stories that I could have told you about here today. And people might argue, well, yeah, but there's a big element of criminality in that community. And then I would say that community has been shut out politically, socially, and economically from the systems our society deem acceptable and legal. And then one might say, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to look at all of our systems, political, social, and economic? Are we going to really try to figure out how to change all of them? That's going to really shake up the country. There are people in my community that are dying consistently and even casually. I wonder if that doesn't warrant a bit of shakeup. Octavia Butler is said to have written herself into her stories. Many of her protagonists are strong females with similar features to her. And if I could write myself into the story of Akin, I would do it pretty similarly with the same ability to transmit feeling and memory wholesale. But I would change one thing. I would take away that feeling of overwhelming helplessness. Because this is a community of fantastic integrity and agency. I've gotten to know you, and I know this to be true. And you don't have to go to Detroit to find communities that are suffering. Here in Dane County, we have the highest rate of incarceration of folks of color per capita anywhere in the country. And you know who's working on that? Your Moses team. You already have people in this community who are looking at that problem and actively trying to counteract it. And if you're struggling with the issue of Black Lives Matter and race and how it affects us spiritually and socially, you know who's working on that? Your equity team. You have another great group of folks that you can go to and say, hey, listen, I want to talk about this. I want to do something. I feel helpless. I feel overwhelmed. Octavia Butler, it turns out, not only wrote herself into her fiction, she wrote herself into her reality. Unfortunately, she died a couple of years ago, and we found her journals, and in her journals, there were all of these fantastic and wonderful and totally possible stories about how she would be a best-selling author, about how she would have enough and everything she needed, and so would everyone else. Many of you have probably heard the story about Flint, Michigan, and what's going on with the water there. The people in Flint, Michigan, for those of you who don't know, have had their democratic rights taken away and an emergency financial manager installed that made decisions to switch their water source to something that was not safe, and now lots of children are getting lead poisoning. And one of the mothers in Flint, Michigan said, if you want to help my babies, don't send us bottled water, join the revolution. By the way, the person that was the emergency financial manager who made that decision for Flint is currently the emergency financial manager for Detroit Public Schools. And maybe you're not ready to join the revolution yet, and maybe you don't even know what that looks like, and maybe you don't even know how to take the first step. And if that is the case, I would encourage you to also listen to fantastic and brave women in this community. In this case, Kelly Crocker. A couple of weeks ago, Kelly asked us to imagine the type of person that we want to be, to look into the future and actually see ourselves as who it was that we would be if we were fully who we wanted to be. Octavia Butler would say that you can't do that unless you can live in the world that you want to live in. So this week, I'm going to ask you all to continue the dialogue with me, to continue to be brave, to continue to be open, to continue this community's efforts towards justice. By some fluke of schedule, you have to deal with me in the pulpit again next week. So I am going to ask you to write your own story. If you don't know how to start the revolution, maybe you should picture a world in which it is complete. I want you to go home and think about the world that you want to live in. What did it take to get there? And what did you do? I want you to write yourself in to the possibility of a more perfect world. And if you're stuck, remember that it doesn't matter how fanciful or fictional this is, that your imagination is the only limit. And then I want you to send these writings to me. I want you to send these writings to me so that we can continue to think about what our faith can do, what this community can do, what you can do individually to fulfill the promise of this faith. Because we can. We are humans of great agency and great integrity. I would like you to know that unless you specifically say so, unlike all of the other communications you would have with me, this won't be confidential. Because your dreams are too inspiring not to share. Let's keep working together, folks. It's hard and it's messy, but it's life and it's human. And no matter what any alien race might say looking down on us, I think we've got something pretty good going on. Blessed be. May it be so. Speaking of humans making silly decisions, the Senate has voted to defund Planned Parenthood once again, and we're going to do something about that today. We're going to take a collection up for Planned Parenthood. The offering is going to go today to Planned Parenthood, so give generously as you are able. join me in our final hymn? Number 149. God in this song, the God of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, may not be the same God as many of us here in this room, or maybe we don't perceive of God in the same way. And I know I've thrown a lot of God language at you today. Thank you for bearing with me. Our choir sang of the troubles of the world being done, and that God promised that there would be a place after this world where those troubles could be done. But if we don't conceive of God that way, then it is our duty as a religious body to work on those troubles here in this world. May they be done soon. Blessed be. Go in peace. Return in love, and please be seated for the postlude.